Hi, I'm Karyn, and I'm here with Kelly. We are back to answer your questions, anything having to do with grief. So, Kelly, this is one that I think a lot of people can relate to. You and I can both relate to this. But the question is, how do I deal with the loss of a pet?
Yeah, so it is pet loss is what I call a disenfranchised grief. And what that means is it's not always accepted by society. It tends to be minimized. Oh, it's just a dog or it's just a cat. But, pet loss can be extremely difficult. They can be our babies. I wrote about it and the grief experience after the death of my little PJ who died suddenly and unexpectedly. And, it rocked my world for a little bit. It was really surprising, how difficult it was, and, there's some research out there that even talks about, for some people, it's even harder than sometimes, the death of a human. And, so I think it's about acknowledging your grief. I think it's also maybe finding ways to mourn your pet, right? Because you may not get the support that you need. There's a lot of great Facebook groups online. What I always tell people, those pet loss groups are great, but sometimes they can be a little overwhelming because they're really sad stories. So maybe join it and unfollow it and go to it when you want to, when you're in the right headspace. I also think that for me, like I make scrapbooks. So after each of them died, I made a memory box and a scrapbook and I put all their pictures and their nicknames in there and just something like I needed to do something with my grief. And that was really beneficial for me. I even sought out animal mediums, right? I wanted which I didn't really think I got much from, but I was willing to try.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think it's kind of some of the same stuff that we would tell you for any type of loss, right? Make sure you're taking care of yourself, make sure you're making space for your grief, reach out for support if you need to.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the validating it has got to be a big part for people because, it's not only other people diminishing it, but sometimes we have a tendency to be like, why am I so upset? Why am I having such a hard time? But I know with pet losses that I've had, we just lost, our favorite beloved dog in the fall, and it's like all the corners, the places that he sat, and his spot on the couch, and even trying to figure out what to do with the stuff, like I still have a bowl that has his name on it I really don't want to get rid of, and those kinds of things. So you're like, and we're recognizing that it's not the same, but it is a significant loss, no question. um I think the other thing too, and Kelly, you probably have come across this with people, is that there is also pet loss that happens after the loss of a spouse, maybe, and how I've heard this so much in my groups where people would be like, it was his favorite dog or it was his cat, like, and it feels like a second loss, or losing their loved one all over again. Have you come across that with people?
Yeah, I mean, and what it made me think of, I've had several clients where maybe it was their parent that died,
Mm,
and then they got their parent's dog
yeah.
and or cat, and then that animal dies. And then they feel like they're re-grieving their parent all over again because that was their connection that was left,
Yeah.
right? So I've seen that happen a ton.
Yeah.
Um, and that, it's just again, we re-grieve, right? And it comes back up and we may think we're doing okay, but then that's going to trigger some things because that's that connection.
Yeah.
And pets are, I think, the best teachers of mindfulness. They're always kind of in the present moment. They're always that constant in our lives. They're there when we get home. They're happy to greet us, and they're sad when when we come back 5 minutes later, they act like they're, just as happy. So they can provide a lot of support to us when we're grieving. And for me, my little Benny that we have now, I have a little almost 10-month-old Boston Terrier puppy. And when he's been seeing me upset recently, like crying or whatever, he'll come over and lick my face.
Oh.
And it's like the sweetest thing in the world.
Yeah.
Like he knows what I need at that moment, right? And so I think that's what can be so difficult.
Yeah. It's such a simple and beautiful relationship to have with your pet, and there is that connection and everything else. So I guess, yeah, what we would say is that make sure you're not diminishing it, make sure, you're not trying to talk yourself out of it, and not feeling too rushed to do things one way or the other. I mean, the other thing too that comes up for people is, should I get another pet? And I find that's very individual. Some people you know, my brother, for example, he didn't get another dog for, gosh, maybe 10 years. You know,
Yeah.
he lost the dog. And I
Mm.
think he was afraid that anything other than that, any other dog was just not going to live up, that he'd be constantly comparing, and that he just didn't want to do that. And maybe it felt disloyal, you know, perhaps. And then some people, they feel better with a pet loss with getting another pet. And
Exactly.
that's okay too, you know? So, I mean, that's a very, very personal, you
And I
know.
do, I had a mom and a daughter come to me for a while, and they had their pup die during COVID. And so obviously we're all home, right? We're spending all this time with our animals, and it was pretty sudden and traumatic, unfortunately. And saw them for a while, processed through some of that. And then I was out to dinner with some friends a few months later, and one of the mom came over. She's like, "I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I just need to show you this picture. We got a new dog, and it has really helped."
Oh,
But I also know people that I've heard who've gotten a new dog too soon,
yeah.
and they haven't been able to get that connection that they maybe had with that previous dog. So I really think I always say, you'll know when you're ready.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, you're not replacing that pet. You
No.
know, if we go into it knowing that pet's so special, there's absolutely no replacing them. But I am missing that companionship. I am missing the energy. You know, the animals can be very silly, and you know, just there's things that they just provide, and another animal could potentially do that. But we want to be careful that it's not rushed either. It's that line. But as you said, I think people do usually know. I know that I've known,
Yep.
you know, when it's time.
To be honest, I think having Benny has helped us talk even more about Boomer and PJ.
Mm,
And, some of his little things that he does, I'm like, oh, that is so PJ. You
yeah,
know,
yeah,
and so it's been actually, I think it's been really helpful in our grief journey. But that's, it's not always the case for everybody. So
yeah. That is such a good point because we've always had dogs, and still talk about the earliest dog, you know, all the time because of comparisons or things that you miss. So you just, you know, you don't get over it, but it's a tough one. I mean, it really is tough. So, all right, Kelly. Well, thank you so much, and thank you to everybody. And remember, if you have questions, send them in. We're here to answer them.